4, 3.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of 3 webinars presented to you by IATA on the industry restart, ready for takeoff. Today we will be looking at airline personnel readiness and airline readiness. And before we commence, we would just like to remind all the participants of some of the legal guidelines that we are presenting these webinars under. So we would ask the participants from refraining from any discussion with matters regarding to such as fares, charges, divisions of or sharing of traffic, revenues, or concerning other competitively sensitive topics outside of the scope of this agenda. And therefore, we will not be entertaining any questions that go into that direction. And you're welcome to put your questions into the Q&A chat at any time. And with that, I would like to hand over to Carlos Cerillo to start today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As Marco mentioned, today we are going to focus on the first part of the webinars, focusing on the airline personnel readiness and the airline readiness. Next slide, please. As you know, like almost every challenge in aviation requires a team effort to solve it. And today we face the biggest challenge in commercial aviation history. We started the industry that has largely ceased the operations. Borders are totally closed, and we need to ensure that we make it in a way that aviation is not a meaningful vector to spread the COVID-19. So this will require a collective work. We all have to work together to make sure that we introduce process that in the system that you make it safer than ever. Next slide, please. Collaboration, as I mentioned, is vital. So governments will need to work together to implement consistent measures around the globe. And those measures has also to be able to be working in a way to restore air connectivity and passenger confidence to air travel. So we will always need to work together, government, industry, to ensure that what we are implementing is practicable and also a viable and operational way. I'd like to highlight our commitment to the International Civil Aviation Organization global provisions for restoring air connectivity. They are contained in a recently published document called Takeoff Guidance for Air Travel Through the COVID-19 Public Health Crisis. In our website, you have a direct link to all those elements that you have on this document. And that's a global accepted measures that we hope all states will join in and now implement it in the same way. Next slide, please. But it's important that we do it as quick as we can. As you see here in this slide, that is in a normal way, in a normal day, what aviation brings in terms of GDP to the economy, employment, and so on. So it's important that we do it in a way that is recognized that aviation is a vital driver for the world economy to recover. And at the end, when this crisis ends, aviation needs to be ready for another role that's helping to restore the economy and lift people's spirit as well to the power of travel. Next slide. In this regard, we put together this notional timelines, the one that we are following for our industry restart plan. We are focusing on the immediate actions that are minimum measures in place to make sure that governments feel comfortable to approve flights and open the borders. Moving forward to the intermediate phase, we hope those temporary measures globally accepted will be consistent, and mutual acceptance between the states will be very important. And after the crisis is, I would say, contained, we'll be able to start removing all these temporary arrangements. We don't want this to be like a post 9/11, where we today go to an airport and you face different process and procedures. We never know when you have to take your shoes or not, and worse, you never know why you are doing this. So we want to avoid this to happen in this case. Next slide, please. We are looking two different ways on this industry restart. The first one, we're looking to the system restart, is where we have the system capability, get planes back to the sky. To have experience, we are going to talk about this tomorrow, taking all the necessary precautions to avoid the spread of COVID-19. We are looking to the airport, all the processes and procedures being implemented. And the second one is demand restart, where we want to restore confidence so states can be confident to relax travel restrictions, and the public is confident to fly again. And stimulate demand while keeping the travel affordable and get people on the planes. This week, we are looking at all those three webinars focusing on the system restart part. And more specifically today, we are talking about the system capability. And now I will hand over to my colleague, Stuart Fox, who will get more into detail on the airline side. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Stuart Fox, Director of Flight Operations at IATA, based in Montreal. Firstly, I'd like to add to what Carlos has just said, and to say that IATA is advocating and supporting the smooth implementation of the ICAO Council Aviation Recovery Task Force 10 key principles. And to that end, we have a range of documents that help support the implementation. And indeed, all these initiatives you'll hear about today are aligned with those. And in particular, they're all aligned with the CART takeoff guidance. For example, we provide a tool which states or operators can determine the alleviations that have been implemented by the states during this crisis period. And indeed, it can track those, and it's very useful for everybody concerned. I'd now like to go through providing a context to this presentation today. So next slide. Thank you very much. So earlier this year, the industry faced an unprecedented situation in which countries introduced travel restrictions. Airlines were receiving these notifications of these restrictions on occasions while aircraft were en route, forcing some flights to divert, turn around, and fly back to where they came from in some cases. These restrictions, as well as physical distancing policies, also impacted airlines' ability to move and train their staff, which is something we're going to expand on later today. From about 30,000 active aircraft flying at the end of 2019, which you'll notice on the presentation there, as well as 3,000 parked aircraft at the end of 2019, we saw that in April, 18,000 were parked up. Pictures like the ones you see on the slides there became the norm at airports around the world. The new norm became not pictures of aircraft flying, which we all see in the press normally, but aircraft parked on the ground. Aircraft utilization had reduced from slightly more than 9 hours per day pre-COVID to around 5 hours per day in April. Things have improved slightly now, with aircraft being brought back into service, and in May, aircraft utilization had increased to just under 6 hours per day. These parked aircraft discussed are parked in 180 countries and at about 1,000 locations around the world. 1/3 in Europe, a quarter in North America, another quarter in Asia Pacific. These aircraft still need to be maintained, fuel systems still need to be treated, and of course we need to have insurance. Next slide, please. So again, expanding what Carlos was talking about there, we're talking about the system restart in particular today, and broadly speaking, two areas in particular: airline personnel readiness and licensing, and airline readiness (certification). So we've got, for the airline personal readiness, we're going to talk about pilot licensing. For the airline readiness, we're going to talk about airworthiness, tech ops, and maintenance repair organizations. The ISAGO and IOSA support programs, which are the audit programs IATA have, insurance and fuel. So over to you, Jan. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stuart, and Jan Renier, Head of Training and Licensing, based in Montreal as well. So I would like to take a few minutes to provide you some element of context on this slide. First, I would like to remind you that our members must ensure that all operational personnel involved in ground and flight operations are properly trained and are competent to perform their duties. So I am speaking about all the personnel. Among the operational personnel, you have, as an example, maintenance personnel, flight dispatchers, cabin crew, pilots are holder of a license, and that means they are submitted to additional regulatory requirements to maintain their license valid. In a nutshell, operator training is done in a very controlled environment and regulated environment. What you see on the slide is pilots doing a training session in a simulator. No, please. Can you go back to the slide, please? I stay a little bit on this slide. Thank you. So you see pilots in a full flight simulator doing a training session. So now I focus on the pilots specifically among this licensed personnel. Pilots spend an average of 8 days to perform their recurrent training. 4 days in a full flight simulator, exactly what you see on the screen, spread along the years. 2 days on the ground to review some specific knowledge, airline policy, airline procedures, security protocols, safety and emergency equipment procedure review. 1 day doing a check in operations, we call that a line check, and also 1 day to perform the medical assessment. So during the COVID, what happened? The training centers were either closed or difficult to reach. In some states, the administrative process has been disturbed to revalidate the license, and in many areas of the world, the medical centers, were closed. So it was impossible to maintain the traditional training and licensing requirements in this context. IATA, therefore, has immediately reacted very promptly to put an alert at the state level, the regulator level, to advocate for training and licensing validity extension to permit the maintenance of the operation. As a consequence, I speak in Montreal, ICAO has set up additional meetings for the flight ops panel to find alternative solutions to the traditional ICAO standard. Now I will jump on the next slide, please, to elaborate on the alternative solutions. Because if we ask for an alleviation, that means we put proper mitigation measures in front of this alleviation. So the guidance you see on the screen is a compendium of all the solutions that IATA is proposing in short term, medium term, and long term to manage as its best the pilot training and licensing. This guidance has been totally aligned with ICAO CART and the takeoff guidance. It has been mentioned by Stuart and Carlos. And secondly, this guidance is a result of a collaborative work with different groups. I am speaking about the safety department in IATA Montreal, and also our working group structure. I am thinking about the IATA Pilot Training Task Force. So thank you, all of you, to have participated to this drafting of this guidance. The guide has been released 3 weeks ago and is composed by 3 sections. The first one is related to safety risk assessment. At this stage, we propose a generic template to support an operator drafting a safety case that will sustain the request of alleviations. Alleviations related to the approved training program or to a potential lack of recent experience. Just a few words about recent experience. What we call recent experience is the fact that a pilot needs to have 3 takeoff and landings in the last 3 months before operating a commercial flight. So we have proposed generic solutions to permit to compensate one of the pilots having a lack of recent experience. The second section propose a very practical illustration and how to use the generic safety risk assessment template. And we provide illustrations for virtual classroom because virtual classroom has been needed when it was not possible to go to the training center to have a regular classroom delivery. And this virtual classroom example provide technical elements on how to manage the quality of the training delivery in this context. We also have a detailed illustration about how to conduct a line check in a simulated environment when it is not possible to perform this line check in operation, because you know that our members have decreased their flight program by 90% as an average. The last section is composed by best practice. The first one is linked to the sanitization in the context of the training center. I don't give all the details, but you can imagine that we have specific procedures that applies now in all training centers on how to manage the simulator cleaning and so on, and also how to manage social distancing in a training center. The second part I am very proud of is the competency-based training session. Now we are in June, and in the last 3-4 months, pilots had a very limited training exposure and also a very limited operational experience. So what we have done, we have proposed a training session based on the enhancement of the pilot competencies in order to the pilots to be competent, to be confident, and therefore to be resilient when they return to operation. And the last part is more a long-term initiative that is related to the partnership between operators and also training organizations. At this stage, we promote the expansion of the competency-based training and assessment approach from pilot selection, initial training at the flight school, and afterward at the operator level. So I will be happy to answer your questions at the end of the speech, and I give the floor to Chris Marco. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jan. I'm Chris Marco. I'm the head of operational cost management, based also in Montreal, as all the rest of us. And I will talk about more on issues here related to the airworthiness of the aircraft, what in the airline side we call technical operations, and issues related to maintenance, repair, and overhaul of the aircraft. So as COVID hit the industry pretty hard, airlines started grounding the aircraft mostly to preserve cash. And aircraft were parked in different locations, as you've seen earlier, massively. However, they're at very different stages. Some of them required maintenance in the upcoming days, weeks, or months. Some of them required some of their components, especially the engines. Some of those engine overhauls cost over $5 million. And they were looking at what it can be done with them. So they started deferring all these events for some of the parked aircraft that were requiring. The whole issue with the grounded aircraft, and if I can have the next slide, please, is that although the aircraft is sitting on the ground, it creates a significant maintenance cost for this parked aircraft. If many of you have, I know many of you have cars, you cannot leave a car unattended. If you go on a vacation, you are going to ask a friend of yours to start the car, maybe move it around if you plan to go for more than a week or two. Otherwise, you will come back and you will hear very strange noises coming from the car. Same with the aircraft. A massive over 50 million ton equipment, over 50 ton equipment that is sitting on the ground on a few tires. These tires need to be rotated so the weight doesn't go to a single point at all this time. The engines, another massive equipment, 5 tons or more at times. They need to be rotated so the engine doesn't sit in a specific case. Other equipment in the aircraft, like air conditioning, electrical systems, they also need to be ensured that they are operating. So all these costs are adding, all these tasks, they need to be maintained, they need to be happening across in different parts of the world. At different stations, and this is creating a significant burden to the airline. These checks are required to preserve the aircraft during this period of parking, of storage of the aircraft, and therefore we started working with the OEMs, with the manufacturers of the aircraft and the engines, on what can be done to extend those tasks. If you have to do something, let's say every 7 days while the aircraft is parked, can we do it maybe every 10 or 15 days and extend that period so we don't have this massive burden? So with the acceptance, the approval, and the guidance of the manufacturers, we have been able to extend those tasks. In addition to those, there are certain other maintenance tasks that they must be. They're part of the operator's maintenance planning document, the MPD as we call it, and they have to happen at particular intervals. So we have been working again with the manufacturers to postpone those tasks to a later day, if possible, even just before the aircraft returns to service. This also requires, in these cases, the approval of the regulators, that they always have the oversight of the maintenance activities of the airworthiness. So all these have been posted recently in our guidance for managing the airworthiness of the aircraft during a post-COVID-19 pandemic, and you can find this on the first link you see on your screen. You can download the document, and please provide us any questions, any comments you may have, because we are looking to add, to improve all these guidance material. They're living documents if you would like to consider them as such. The next item that we started looking was how to return this aircraft into service. What are the issues around returning to service? You saw aircraft parked next to each other. How are we going to operate this aircraft at some point? As I mentioned, some of the tasks that need to be done on parked aircraft is firing up the engines every 7 days or so, as according to the manual. So now this created a significant logistics cost for airlines to identify where the aircraft is, what part of the airport are, so they don't waste a lot of time going there. Not only the location, but also conditions with respect to the weather in these specific cases. Let's say if you leave the aircraft close to the water, close to the sea, there is a significant issue of corrosion to many of the parts of the aircraft. So again, discussing with the manufacturers, we have been working on identifying the best conditions to protect the aircraft. You may have seen the engines that they need to be covered. Other parts of the aircraft, pitot tubes, or areas where there are creases or openings on the aircraft, they also have to be covered. Now, as we return to service, there is significant issues with procurement of parts, as we expect that massive amounts of aircraft will be started coming in when the schedule starts. So we need to start thinking about how to procure parts, how to have the right equipment at the right place to make changes or access to the aircraft. How do we have the right tools to the right place by a number of mechanics? As Jan mentioned earlier, we have issues with some of the licenses that may expire in different parts of the world. How do we ensure these licenses are kept in check? And the resources. Many people have been furloughed during this time. How do we ensure that we have the capacity when the aircraft starts coming into place to be checked by the right personnel? Also, the certification of the MROs, has it expired, and how do we keep that up to date, and the availability of those? In addition, there was sanitizations and cleaning and disinfection of the aircraft. We have created a manual, also a guidance material on the second link you see on the screen. Please download that and use it as you like if you are an operator in your operation. Finally, an issue was about transporting cargo in the cabins. This was seen, and it is still a sort of cash revenue for the airlines, that they didn't have any revenue as passengers were not traveling due to bans and quarantines and all the other issues we mentioned. So how do we ensure that this transport is properly transported in the cabin, either with or without the seats? What is the regulatory environment? How do we make airlines aware? And in that case, we have worked with the OEMs and the regulators, and we have created some guidance material for the transport of cargo and mail in the aircraft that is configured for the carriage of passengers. And that can be also downloaded from the IATA website through that link. And with this, I will pass it on to another issue of fuel that Stuart is going to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Hello again. Yes, so fuel for operators is a significant cost. Next slide, please. In particular, we mentioned 18,000 aircraft were stored at the end of April. Huge number of aircraft. When those aircraft are stored, they have to be stored with a certain amount of fuel in the tanks, and some of these fuel tanks can propagate the growth of microbes, so they have to be treated. So for that, they use a chemical, biocide, and we noted that there was a concern raised there may be issues with availability. So we set to and started a campaign to ensure that, advocate that there is enough biocide, particularly there was a possible shortage in Europe. We've been successful in that campaign. Along with that, to make sure that the guidance available to everybody has been harmonized. So we've been working with the OEMs, aircraft original equipment manufacturers, to make sure this guidance has been produced and harmonized. In order to avoid a possibility of lack of defueling equipment. Why did I say defueling? Because some of these aircraft have to be defueled if they've been treated with biocide. We've also advocated to have a strategy where that would not need to be done. So basically educating the industry. We've got together some ad hoc groups consisting of airlines, regulators, standards bodies to discuss these matters. And recently we've participated in, like I said, a collection of stakeholders to draft a document produced by the Energy Institute, and for your reference, it's EI 1566. It's for the injection of biocide into jet fuel for aircraft maintenance providers, manufacturers, purchasers, and users of jet fuel. Very useful for everybody concerned, and the information in this publication would be very particularly of interest to operators and interpaying fuelers. Along with this, recently we've had some webinars on how to test fuel for these microbes, and also to educate people on how to avoid culturing these microbes by removing water, for example, the free water in the fuel. So that's it, a brief snapshot into our fuel work streams. Now I'm going to turn over to Serkan. Serkan.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Serkan Simitioğlu, the head of the IATA Operational Safety Audit, also called IOSA. Today I'm going to brief you on the support programs that IATA is implementing in the IATA Operational Safety Audit and in the IATA Safety Audit for ground operations. IOSA is an internationally recognized and accepted evaluation system that is designed to assess the operational management and control systems of an airline. Audits are performed in these airlines against safety standards and recommended practices every 2 years. We have about 440 airlines that are today IOSA registered. IOSA is also mandatory to become IATA member, and it's the industry benchmark today used between co-chair partners, by alliances and regulators alike. The IATA Safety Audit for Ground Operations, also called ISEGO, is a subscription-based program that today has approximately 200 ground service providers registered at about 200 airports worldwide, and this covers approximately 300 stations, as each ground service provider, or GSP as we call them, operates at several stations. Now with COVID-19, it impacted the airlines and the service providers, of course, as we already know. They could not perform or could not receive the audits on time prior to their 2-year registration expiry date. So this left them confronted with several consequences, such as for IOSA registered airlines losing potentially their IATA membership, for co-chair partners losing or risking at suspending their co-chair operation with their co-chair partners, and airlines that have regulators which make extensive use of the IOSA program, of course, they were confronted with additional burden, maybe additional restrictions, or even losing their, for example, third country operation authorization by relevant regulators. So this is the reason why IOSA and ISEGO then stepped up and implemented the support programs that I'm going to brief you on shortly. Next slide, please. So the support programs have basically 3 main objectives, as you can see on the top. One, we want to support airlines and ground handlers with pertinent and affordable audit solutions, ensure minimum industry-wide safety assurance activity during the crisis, and contribute to the reopening of air traffic through audit results provided to civil aviation authorities. Now, if we go a bit into detail in the first objective here, IOSA and ISEGO have implemented relief measures to date to airlines and ground service providers respectively, which cannot conduct registration renewal audits because of the risk to health, to travel restrictions, or because of general audit readiness. So once validated by IATA, extenuating circumstances can allow an airline or a ground service provider of up to 6 months of extension on top of the expiry date. For registration renewal audits, airlines and ground service providers will soon have the option of remotely undergoing a registration renewal audit. In this remote audit, the standards that will be audited will be significantly reduced to contain requirements that are safety critical during the crisis. This reduced checklist has been vetted by the IATA governance groups, task forces, as well as key regulators. Additionally, the audit will capture relevant business continuity aspects in order to build up trust into the operations. The purpose for that is, as we know that the audit report is going to be requested by, for example, co-chair partners, leasing partners, or regulators, we know that these organizations will look for information in regards to the ramp up of the operation, of the restart of the operation, and this will play a crucial role in rebuilding that trust and granting the authorization or entering the code-share agreement and so on and so forth. So all in all, the reduced audit, then the remote audit, will also lead to a reduced fee, which will make the audit more relevant during the crisis. If we go to the second part here, ensuring minimum industry-wide safety assurance activities, the audit programs must remain the industry safety assurance program, especially during this crisis. Airlines, rightfully so, innovate and start unconventional operations. Many of the airlines are today flying with limited safety oversight. Quality assurance and compliance monitoring departments have been partially dismantled. So especially now, and this without being a burden, of course, safety must remain a priority during the crisis in the airline industry. And IOSA and ISEGO are two programs to provide safety assurance here. So the remote and on-site audits will be performed on airlines and ground service providers. A questionnaire was introduced to exchange relevant safety information among airlines, regulators, and ground service providers. And this will be done, of course, only with the consent of the airline or ground service provider. And furthermore, we have issued guidance for safety monitoring during the COVID-19 crisis. This guidance, just like the one of my colleagues, is continuously updated. It's available on the website, and we, of course, look forward to any comments or questions. We'll also continuously providing webinars and individual sessions with all the registered airlines and ground service providers. If we look at the third point, contribute to reopening of air traffic through trustworthy audit results provided to CAAs. Today, we have over 60 states complementing their safety oversight through IOSA. Many of them have embedded the program into their regulations. Some of them mandate even IOSA for the AOC or air operator certificate holders in their countries. So we work closely with key regulators such as the US FAA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, the Australian CASA, to ensure that program changes are acceptable and, of course, add value to their purpose as well. We stay in close contact with dozens of those regulators to ensure that they regain trust into the airlines when reopening traffic and actively use the audit results for this purpose. So IOSA and ISEGO continue to provide relevant and affordable safety assurance during the crisis. There are further changes underway, which will be implemented during the next 2 months. With this, we hope that airlines will receive an adequate support and will demonstrate their commitment to safety throughout the crisis, of course. In addition to this, we're also working on a health safety program for the industry. This program is being developed in collaboration with ICAO. It aims to contribute to the successful launch of the ICAO Public Health Corridor concept. And the requirements for this program are derived from the ICAO CART document that Stuart mentioned earlier on, and other relevant guidances that we take into consideration. Further developments will follow in this regard, and I invite you to follow on our pages iata.org/IOSA and iata.org/ISEGO. And with this, I thank you very much and hand over back to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Serkan. Great, so we all need insurance, we know that. So next slide, please. At the moment, it's very challenging. Some of the insurance products have been removed from the market due to tough times financially for the industry. On the first point, knowledge of sharing and improved risk identification, we've conducted a series of COVID-19 related risk and insurance webinars in May and June for the airline community on relevant topics, and we had 98 of our airlines attend that. That was great. We have a newsletter for airlines highlighting current issues to be launched in July this year, and a new integrated risk guidance manual to be released shortly. Also, we've facilitated dialogue between the airline risk teams and insurance community. And on the issues and concerns regarding renewals, rates for aviation insurance and other lines have hardened, and renewal terms and pricing are challenging. Risk management and insurance have been engaged with brokers, insurers, etc., to support member airlines where possible. And on the last point, alternative risk transfer solutions, COVID-19 has highlighted the inadequacy of some traditional insurance products, so IATA has been investigating innovative solutions for the industry. Thank you very much. We're now to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And with that, going into the Q&A. And the first set of questions, I think we'll most likely ask Jan to respond because it has to do with pilot training. So we have a question regarding the large number of pilots and crew that are likely to be made redundant due to the downturn in business. And what measures are there actually in place for those individuals to be retrained or remain active before they might be called back into active duty? So I don't know if you can give us an idea of how such a situation on crew being furloughed and then being brought back is handled on the training side.
So at this stage, as mentioned, now we are at the fourth month of this situation. So our members, they are, let's say, planning the training sessions. Of course, the demand of the flight is not so huge. So at this time, the training capacity for today, I am speaking for today, is not a problem. This is the feedback I have from the IATA Pilot Training Task Force. Now, in terms of technical content, maybe it is the question. After 3-4 months, you are, let's say, a little bit less trained and you have a little exposure to operations. This is what I mentioned. The situation is not, let's say, catastrophic because you very quickly you can be, let's say, competent again. So this is why we have done this CBTA session, competency-based training and assessment session, in order, and I would like to say a few words about this, in order to train and develop all the competencies, but to place what we call special emphasis on specific competencies that are key for the restart of operation. And in the principle of the competency-based training and assessment, we have considered that 4 competencies needed a special emphasis for retraining. We are speaking about flight path management manual control, meaning the ability to fly the airplane and to manage the flight path. And this covers the problematic of the recent experience as well. Secondly, to review the procedures, meaning application of procedures must be present for the return of operation because it is an important safety net. And also situational awareness and workload management, because when you are after 3-4 months of inactivity, those competencies needs to be refocused. This is my, let's say, maybe too long answer to this very specific question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think with that, we'll go over to IOSA. How can you ensure auditing effectiveness embedded in the IOSA program and the time validity of the remote audit?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. The IOSA program has been already working on introducing relevant methods to capture the effectiveness of the way the airline implements the standards in the last, I would say, 1.5 years. So for that matter, we have been working with our governance groups and the stakeholders on introducing a concept from the International Safety Management Collaboration Group. That is a collaboration group comprised of civil aviation authorities worldwide. This group, also called SMICG, has developed a method that assesses the effectiveness of safety management systems. So in our collaboration with them, we adopted certain of their methods into the IOSA procedures, which basically looks at a given standard or requirement and then assesses whether the requirement is present, suitable, operational, and then effective. So this maturity model was about to, or has been introduced in certain standards. For example, the standard that requires an airline to have a hazard identification and risk mitigation program, a flight data analysis program, and also a process to monitor its code-share and wet lease partners. We have been successfully launching this method over the last years. Now, of course, with the new challenges that we have, we are looking at different ways how to deploy this method in more standards. Some of the challenges that we're facing, of course, with that is that assessing this maturity model is quite a big pivot in the audit methods, in the sense that it requires significantly more time. But having said that, the task forces are right now looking at a way to expand the number of standards where we look at effectiveness of implementing the standards. Regarding the second question, we are currently looking at a registration period of 12 months for the remotely conducted IOSA registration renewal audit. Thank you, Marcus.
Okay, thank you, Serkan. And I think the next question will go over to Chris. So, Chris, this one is for you. Monitoring of pavement condition is also important when restarting operations, as depressions on the flexible pavement under wheels, damages to pavement from fuel leakage, etc., could be a problem. Airside operations need to note this along the MRO. Are there any standard ops procedures for this?
Thanks for the question. I think this question refers mostly to the airports. So I'm not fully aware of how the pavement is taken. However, what I can mention here is that in all these locations, pavements are, they should be aware of what is going to happen before the aircraft is parked there, so they would know. And then it's part of the programs that the aircraft has to be moving around these areas. There are in some cases conditions that the aircraft where wind is, if there's significant wind, the aircraft has to be tied down to the ground. So all these are being taken care. However, I need to refer to my airport colleagues. I'm not sure if anyone on the panel can address this, but we can get back on this question and answer this question with the help of our airport colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Now we have one. Let me just read it out, and if I have any takers in the panel, please let me know. What options are available for states without ATO facilities at the start of operations? How will they get required proficiency considering the current travel restrictions?
So they've got no ATO. So I guess, Jan, I could probably input into this. No approved training organization approval. Well, we do realize the fact that some states require to audit ATOs to get approval. That wouldn't be possible if they can't travel, of course, but they are open to other mechanisms to approve those. For example, remote audits, they can get documentation sent to do that, and that type of thing. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there if the individual operators liaise with their regulators appropriately.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh in on that, or otherwise we can move to the next question?
Marcus, just to complement what, to support what Stuart said, I know that some authorities have done, let's say, audits of ATOs remotely. So this is to answer the question of the, let's say, the ATO approval. Now the question, if you are in a state where you have no access to any ATOs, you are in a big trouble for sure.
Okay. With that, I guess it's probably one more for Chris. I'm really awaiting to know how materials of the aircraft body parts react in reflying after the groundings. I guess this is related to the structural integrity of an aircraft after the grounding is over and it takes back to the air. I don't know, Chris, if you want to make some comments on that.
Sure, and thanks for the question. This is very important, and actually this is the whole reasoning why even when the aircraft is parked and grounded, still we need to be taking care of the various components of the aircraft, the various systems that are on the aircraft, ensure that they are working well. So we work very closely with the manufacturers to ensure that integrity of all the parts, all the materials on the aircraft is properly maintained. This is nothing very different from what we do as maintenance on a day. This is our daily jobs to ensure that the aircraft is airworthy, is coming back to service. There's nothing different here. The maintenance program and the aircraft maintenance manual are pretty open and in detail in what we need to do during this time. It's very frequent that an aircraft can stay out for a year or two or even more and then come back to service because all the procedures, everything that needs to be done has been clearly identified and we know how to do that. This is nothing unusual for us on how to bring back an aircraft after a long period that has been parked. So I can ensure that everything has been taken care of by the manufacturer and by the operator with the oversight of the regulator. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So, sorry, I was on mute. So with that, we'll go on to a question regarding ground handling. So I don't know, Serkan, if that would be on your side, maybe. Any guidance for frontline passenger handling, ground staff, check-in, boarding, etc., on the expiration of mandatory training certificates, DG CAT 09, AVSEC, or similar?
Specifically on the expiration of training certificates, I am not aware that we have guidance for ground staff. Jan explained for, of course, flying crew. What we look at here is there is no guidance on ground operations side of things regarding mitigation measures and regarding the restart of ground operations. So I think I can definitely recommend to visit our website and to have a look on the ground operations guidance there, because that document might very well address expired licenses as such as well. From an IOSA standpoint, what we're looking at is we will be confronted with IOSA airlines that will have received extensions for certificates, be it on the ground staff or be it on flight crews. We're working with our colleagues within IATA and of course our stakeholders outside to make sure our audit protocols account for that. So for example, if you have an airline that has staff or that has relief measures from its civil aviation authority, such as extended licenses, then we will account for this in the IOSA audit accordingly.
I can complement that as well, Marcus. Just to highlight, on Thursday, we are going to have a specific webinar where we're going to talk about the whole supply chain. So questions addressing airport, and we have a specialist on ground handling as well on Thursday. And then he's going to go a little deeper in terms of all the guidance material that we have developed to support the ground handling.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. And we have several questions relating sort of to the human factor and stress basically for crew who haven't been flying for a long time and now returning to, let's say, a completely different work environment. So I don't know, Jan, if you can make a few comments on how on the
yes,
pilot training side.
I mentioned the fact that the return of operation. Oops, you with me? I'm
hearing you, yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. I mentioned the fact that the idea of our CBTA, competency-based training and assessment refresher session, was to ensure that pilots are competent and also confident for the safe return to operations. So competence is, let's say, enhanced and ensured by a training program, and the training program will permit to bring this confidence, because the scenario used in the training program, will be realistic, taking into account what is the new context. So competency development, confidence, the quality and the realism of the training program, combined with a competency-based instructor as well. Normally, you combine the two, and you avoid what you mentioned, the stress to be back in operation. And the combination of competence and confidence provide resilience. What we call resilience is the fact that pilots are able to adapt to disruptions in operations. So the goal of this is why you hear me speaking a lot about this competency-based training and assessment approach. It is because we consider that it is the best way, the most efficient way to train the pilot back to go to operation. Is it okay, Marcus?
Yes, I think that was very good. Before we move on, I have a very specific one here on simulator use to maintain 3 takeoffs and landings. Is there any comment you can make on that from a pilot training perspective?
Yes. Yes, in fact, we have a broad audience this morning, so if you are not specialist, it is difficult to understand. The requirement is to have, as a prerequisite, 3 takeoff and landing in the last 3 months if you have to operate an aircraft in a commercial flight. Those takeoff and landing can be done either in an aircraft or either in a simulator. Outside the COVID context, when you are in normal operations, if you are a long-range pilot, you have approximately 10 takeoff and landings in the last 3 months. If you are in a domestic network, flying a domestic network, you have 50 plus takeoff and landing in the last 3 months. So it's not a problem. Due to the disruption of the flight program, minus 90% of the flight, we have the situation where some pilots have less than the 3 takeoff and landing. And at the same time, the simulator is not accessible because it is closed. Some members, they have closed for 2 months, and or it is not accessible because you have a travel ban. So what we have done is to propose a solution at the cockpit crew level to compensate this lack of recent experience. So example, one pilot has 2 and 2 instead of 3 and 3. The other pilot is, as an example, an instructor, a pilot instructor, and he has the 3 and 3 because he has the prerequisite. So I hope I have been clear enough to explain what is the recent experience and what we have proposed as a solution. We have proposed other solutions, but this is a basic solution.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan, and very conscious of time. I'll just go for the last couple of questions. As we said before, we do aim to respond to everyone who has put a question into the chat, then directly offline via email in the coming days. And with that, Serkan, I have a few that are still seeking clarification on the extension of both the IOSA and the ISAGO registries. So maybe you can just clarify the validity of both certificates or registries during these special times.
Yes, so the extension for a ground service provider and an IOSA registered airline are, of course, 2 separate processes, as they belong to the 2 separate programs. So yes, there is this option for both programs. So what needs to be done is the airline, for example, needs to make a claim of extenuating circumstances to IATA. We have all the necessary forms online at iata.org/IOSA and iata.org/ISAGO. Once IATA validates that claim, then the operator will receive an additional 180 calendar days following the registration expiry date, which will be reflected through an annotation on the airline's public registry. So the public registry will read, due to circumstances surrounded by the COVID-19 outbreak, the operator is under extenuating circumstances until XYZ date. That means by that date, that airline needs to still perform and close their registration renewal audit. And with the remote audit, we hope that this will be accomplished in a more feasible manner, because we assume, of course, that the airline that is under an extension is there because they couldn't receive or undergo the audit on site. Does that clarify it, Marcus, or are there other questions?
I think for the time being, it seems to be clarified. And we have a few questions in the chat relating generally to the lifting of travel restrictions and also overall industry recovery. And I don't know if Carlos or Stuart or if anyone just wants to make some general comments on that, which I would then consider as the closing comments for today's webinar.
I can start, Marcus, on regarding the travel restrictions, and of course our expectation is that with the recent approved and published document from ICAO, the state will feel confident to start opening their borders for travel again. We have already seen some movement in this area. Of course, this is a state decision, and it will depend on every state how they're going to open. But as I said, I expect that these are going to be aligned with ICAO, what ICAO is providing.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. And with that, I think I'd like to thank all the participants for their interaction today. I'd like to thank our panelists for providing an update. I know we've had a few questions in the chat also regarding aircraft cleaning and sanitization. So you will be happy to know that the next webinar, which is on Wednesday, 17th of June this week, from 1 to 2 p.m. Central European Time. This will be a joint webinar with ACI, the Airports Council International, and the topics will include fitness to fly, the airport experience, onboard experience, and sanitization and cleaning. So we will be providing more information on that. And the last in the series will be Thursday, 18th of June, from 2 to 3 Central European Time, and we will be looking at the issues of slots and the supply chain. It is the second webinar in the industry restart focusing on the system capability. As I said, slots to ensure the schedules and the services provided by the airlines and the ground handlers and the entire service chain to restart this industry. So with that, again, many thanks for joining us today. We will be getting back to all the unanswered questions, and the material will be made available on our website, iata.org, during the course of the next days. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, and for those joining us sort of in the Americas time zone, have a good rest of your day.